Welcome back. I hope everyone enjoyed lunch and had enough of it. I heard some feedback that there needs to be a cookie, so we'll work on that for the next lecture series. A wonderful morning. Thank you to Peggy and Arthur. And we start this afternoon with another great speaker, Michael Dyer, our senior maritime historian at the Whaling Museum, is here to talk about the role of mariners' homes. I forgot to bring my little piece of paper to tell you exactly what it is, but the role of mariners' homes and their history. So with no further ado, Mike Dyer.
Well, good afternoon, folks. Now's your chance for a good nap. You've had plenty to eat. Now I'll proceed to put you right to sleep. This talk, unlike many of the talks that I give, is going to be a little bit sparse on original art and quite heavy on published material. And there's a very, very good reason for that. Standing in the Seamen's Bethel, the Seamen's Friends Society was absolutely dedicated to making certain that sailors had good reading material on shipboard and available for them to read in reading rooms. So reading rooms are a huge part of this. The topic that I'm going to be addressing here is actually a pretty massive movement, international in scope. The Seamen's Friends Societies originated in England, but quickly spread all around to ports all around the world. And the Bethel flag was a symbol, not just a symbol. It wasn't simply a symbol. It was also an announcement that you could, that a sailor, or anybody for that matter, but it was generally pointed towards sailors, could visit someplace other than the grog shop, or other than the brothel, or other than whatever other shoreside enticements there were on waterfronts everywhere. And so this first image that you see was taken from the Sailor's Magazine, and so we'll move right into some of the complexities of what this building stands for as far as 19th century maritime culture was concerned. Hope and despair are two themes frequently encountered in the annals of sailors before the mast, and each parallels the other in a shadowy, complex dynamic, interactive dynamic that exists under this umbrella of seafaring, commerce, and commercial navigation. Right here on the screen, you'll see on the left side there's a piece of scrimshaw with the sailor carrying a lantern and the anchor inscribed with hope, and likewise this manuscript illustration in the lower right that has the anchor of hope and also the pilot schooner approaching the lighthouse. So there are symbols embedded throughout this culture, and the sailors obviously knew all about them. They were the ones who largely originated them. But this anchor is a symbol of hope. We'll go back very quickly, and you can see on the Bethel flag itself in the upper left-hand corner that there is this symbol. So it's not trivial, nor is the actual experiences that that sailors lived with. Long John Aiken, Francis Aiken, from Dartmouth, penned a verse in his journal kept aboard the ship Virginia of New Bedford in 1844, and it epitomizes the whole point of this discussion. He writes, he says, "My life is like the scattered wreck cast by the waves upon the shore. The broken mast, the rifted deck tell of the shipwreck that is o'er. Yet from these relics of the storm, the mariner his raft will form again to tempt the faithless sea, but hope rebuilds no bark for me. So he's on a 4-year voyage to the Pacific Ocean when he writes this in his journal, and he sees no hope for the life that he's living. When sailors came ashore, on waterfronts everywhere, Melville tells us, right away in Moby Dick, the first thing that Ishmael does is he finds this boarding house and this tavern, and he goes in there and he drinks, his alcohol, and while he's in there, a ship of sailors, whalemen come in and they make a straight wake for the bar, and they drink their alcohol, and that's what J. Sherborne Sleeper here in Tales of the Ocean is showing. And Tales of the Ocean was one of the books that was identified by Seamen's Friends Society as being detrimental to the good of sailors. The Pirate's Own Book was another of these. It's not quite pornographic, but it's certainly not the sort of thing that is going to elevate the morals and virtues of this largely downtrodden class of people. J. Ross Brown famously illustrated a picture for philanthropists. The philanthropists he's talking about are the Seamen's Friends Society. They are the largely Protestant congregations and well-wishers all around the world who are trying to elevate sailors to a more stable place in society. Of course, the sailors themselves, the frontispiece here for the tragedy of the seas. What do they see? What is their life? It's potential disaster straight down the pike, and so a glass of booze after a long voyage is a pretty good thing. Of course, it can lead to severe detriment, and there's no prevarication here. I mean, this isn't theoretical. Okay, one sailor wrote a book, right, and the book was called Scraps from the Logbook of George L. Colburn, who was more than 20 years a sailor, and it was published in 1854. And this is what George Colburn says. He shipped on board an unidentified New Bedford vessel in 1832. 1832, okay, the year this building was constructed. And he says, I became, in consequence of that early formation of an appetite for drink, a living mass of moral, physical, and intellectual putrefaction. I have a confession to make. The only reason I agreed to do this talk is I could come up here and say living moral mass of putrefaction. So after all confidence had been lost in me by my friends, I found myself in New Bedford, where I soon shipped as a common sailor on board a whale ship. So the Constitution of the Port Society was adopted in 1830, and it stipulated that in addition to protecting the rights and interests of seamen, the society would furnish them with moral, intellectual, and religious instruction. And again, this is no joke, and it wasn't lost on the men themselves. So this illustration of the sailors confronting the merchants from the Tales of the Ocean gets us, largely right into the same conversations that we're having now. In 2017, the rich have all the money and everybody else has to suck it up, right? So this is the sort of thing that the debate that runs through society. The religious, the morals of religious evangelicals are held to a great standard, and this is somehow everything is going to rise to this peak of satisfaction somehow through society, and yet that is not actually the case. William Comstock in 1838 writes he wrote a book called Voyage to the Pacific, descriptive of the customs, usages, and sufferings on board of a Nantucket whale ship. And he says, yes, a judge whose whole life has been spent in the closet or on the bench, who knows no more of a vessel or the conduct of seamen on board one of them than a ring-tailed monkey knows of algebra, gravely tells the public that seamen are a degraded mass of beings. Much does he know about sailors, he who, if perchance he takes a trip in a steamboat, never comes on deck without 2 great coats around his bloated paunch, 7 nightcaps on his head, and a boy to follow him with a warming pan and an umbrella. And that was Comstock. And then there's Stubbs, right? This guy Stubbs. I'll get you the title of Stubbs's book here in a minute if I can find it. It almost doesn't matter. But what he says is, and this goes directly to this illustration, and if you imagine that this could also go directly to the dozens of signatures of New Bedford merchants that are on the bylaws of the New Bedford Port Society. Are they facing their demons? Or, as we'll get to in a minute, they had a vested interest in all of this. So Stubbs says, our merchant princes, right, in the large seaports who have controlled the destinies of thousands upon thousands of sailors, oppressed them in their wages, exerted their influences to keep them within the power of the grog shop, that they might know where to find them and find them too at their own price, will have their transgressions arraigned in order before their eyes. The day is not far distant when all oppressors shall be destroyed together. So, right here in New Bedford, right down at the foot of Kempton Street, there was a ship that was broken up, and it was dragged up on shore, and a house was built on it. And it was the Camillus. I think it was the first one. There were 2. The first one was the Camillus, I think. But then the second one, and it was like a place for poor people to live. It wasn't necessarily a den of iniquity. The second one, apparently, the Ark of Nantucket, was in fact a brothel, a den of iniquity, that in 1826 spawned a great deal of ire on the part of the local citizens, because the denizens of this place were committing all kinds of vandalism and running around town and doing bad things, and it too was destroyed. So this is going on right here in New Bedford. On this map, I've identified a few of the locations of sailor boarding houses. There were several, and these are not exact because it's really hard on this map to put an exact location. But the Union Street going down toward the waterfront, the end of Spring Street and Elm Street were a few of the locations where there were boarding houses, and there were several, and apparently they were quite good ones. Right here on Bethel Street, right on both sides of the street, right off of Union Street, there were several decent actual boarding houses. But in the first annual report of the Board of Managers of the New Bedford Port Society in 1831, Jonathan Tuttle from Lynn, Massachusetts, who was the first secretary to the Board of Managers of the New Bedford Port Society, he writes this, and this gets back to my earlier comments about the quote-unquote merchant princes. He says, experience has placed the proposition beyond question that on pecuniary grounds merely, it would be good policy to attempt seriously the moral improvement of the men who navigate our vessels and win their cargoes from the monsters of the deep. Not to advert particularly to the horrid catastrophe that took place on the ship Globe of Nantucket, or to other cases where plans of a similar character have been at least meditated. How many voyages have been injured or ruined by the desertion of sailors, or the misconduct or intemperance of the master or the officers. So drunkenness was a big problem, and Samuel Comstock and his murderous mutiny on the Globe rocked the maritime and the whaling community to its core. And the fact that Tuttle brings this up, you know, in the first comments about the establishment of this place is really quite indicative of how serious the situation had become. I like this idea because I'm a cynic and I don't have a whole lot of faith. I like this idea that vested interest, you know, it behooved businessmen who had invested literally millions in these ships to have clean, sober sailors on board. And so here's a sailor's magazine, and right there on page 181 for 1832 is a column addressing New Bedford and the establishment of the Port Society. But if you look on the left, you will see the list of mariners' churches in Portland, New London, Mystic Bridge, New Haven, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Charleston, Havana, and New Orleans. You know, even on the Great Lakes in Buffalo and Utica, New York, and Cleveland and Lake Erie. And then the boarding houses are listed, are listed as well. There's one in Fairhaven, which I didn't know anything about, which would probably behoove us to look into. A sailor's boarding house in Fairhaven. Who knew? So in the last paragraph here of the Naval Journal, the editor has extolled the virtues of New Bedford whaling vessels as being largely temperance ships, and that some of them are commanded by very pious masters. So here we have, this is why the Whaling Museum collection is so fabulous. This book, you see the date on it, the book was published in 1880. Silas Pope, who was the master of the Bartholomew Gosnold of New Bedford, inscribed it 1881. But that little sticker that's under the sailcloth cover of his Holy Bible is from the New Bedford Bible Society. And you can see it listed, in the city directories as one of the societies in the city. It turns up starting in the 1870s. And it sticks around for a couple of decades, but the combination of temperance, literacy, and religion runs throughout this entire story. So here's a view, the first actual view of the Seamen's Bethel. It was published in the Sailor's Magazine in 1834, and you'll notice that the bell tower is actually much higher than it is now. Originally, it was actually that high. There was an observatory. This was just a couple years before the observatory on the Custom House. Now, you're going to find this hard to believe, but it's absolutely a fact. From the top of the Custom House in late 1830s and into the 1840s, you had a straight shot to Dumpling Rock's Light. So you could actually see Dumpling Rock's Light across Clark's Cove and down in Buzzards Bay. Why this is important is that there was a telegraph system on Dumpling Rock's Light, and there was another telegraph system on Cuttyhunk, so that as ships approached, that information could be conveyed from Cuttyhunk to Dumpling Rocks, and from Dumpling Rocks to the observatory. Here, early on, and then when this tower was cut down, to the Custom House. And so, masters knew that or agents knew that their ships were approaching, which is just kind of a cool thing. But here we go, the House of God, right, the Bethel, and the British and Foreign Seamen's Friends Society and Bethel Union. Lurking largely in the background of all this, and this is another topic entirely, but, well, maybe not entirely, it's another subtopic of what we're talking about, maybe even a larger topic than what we're talking about, is missionaries. missionary activities in the Pacific and elsewhere around the world, which actually predated the British and Foreign Seamen's Friends Society and Bethel Union by a long shot. There were missionaries, started turning up in the Pacific in the 1780s, and they were going out to quote unquote improve the people that lived there. So here's the original bylaws and regulations for the New Bedford Port Society for the moral improvement of seamen, and there are all the signatures of these stalwart New Bedford, many Quakers, many other kinds of businessmen as far as their religious affiliations are concerned, but they're all listed there. And are these the merchant princes? I think they are the merchant princes. What one can say is that these merchant princes did some good. And not only them, but their wives. And their wives are nothing to sneeze at. The ladies' branch of the Port Society and the ladies' branch of port societies all around the world largely took it upon themselves to obtain and outfit boarding houses, mariners' homes, like that one that Peggy told you all about this morning. Did you go into all that? Yeah. So Sarah Roach Arnold, donated her father's house after he passed away. Interestingly enough, and this is, I really probably shouldn't open this can of worms, but if you can't do it here, where can you do it? William Roach Jr.'s name is not on this list. We were having discussions in the museum about the Mariners' Home, and it was, it came up in the discussion that this was a Quaker movement, and I said it's not a Quaker movement. This is not a Quaker thing. This is not anti-slavery or abolition we're talking about, which was a Quaker thing. This is a bigger story, and this gets into William Roach not being on here. Gets into this schism between old Lake Quakers and new Lake Quakers and the Unitarians. Old school and sort of new school. What William Roach Jr. did that was really, really important and was also part of this story, part of the same movement, was he established a New Bedford institution for savings bank, which was only the second or third such institution in Massachusetts. And it was located down on Hamilton Street, probably right where that old whale offices were in that building. And it was a bank that was specifically organized so that sailors and other working people could save their money. So this goes sort of hand in hand with everything that was going on with the Port Society, but it's also separate. It's not quite. His name's not on the list, and that's intriguing to me. So here are some of the books. Curiously enough, the illustration is from Reverend Henry Cheever's "The Whale and His Captors," and here you see services on deck. The Commodore Preble flag is flying there, but it might as well say Bethel on it. As a matter of fact, I believe that there's a version of this illustration from Harper's that does in fact say Bethel on it. But this one says the Commodore Preble of Lynn. So Lynn comes up again. The Commodore Preble sailed out of Lynn. Reverend Henry Cheever joined the vessel in Honolulu and sailed back. But he wrote The Whale and His Captors. And he, of course, was a huge proponent of everything that the Bethel movement had encompassed. So in the library across the street, we have several of these copies of hymnals and other books that were distributed by the New Bedford Port Society. I put all three of them, in the photo, all three of the same book, so you can see that there was, these things were distributed. This little box, which you can see over in the Mariners' Home, is an American Missionary Society shipboard library box. And in these, Mystic Seaport has the has the really great collection of shipboard library materials. But in these shipboard libraries were tracts of various kinds, books, pamphlets, and even sometimes newspapers. And very often those are codified lists, so you can figure out exactly what books were taken on shipboard for the men to read. The Seamen's, the one with the illustration, you know, that was actually carried on shipboard, and it was inscribed right on the cover, New Bedford. And so this was, you know, this book originated from there, from here. You know, the sailor, you know, illustrated inside the cover. This is a scene from Benjamin Russell's Grand Panorama of a Whaling Voyage Around the World. And I'm convinced that that Bethel flag is not incidental or an accident or a decoration, that it is a statement. It is a statement of moral intent that this port has for anything else that you can say about it as a seaport, also has it welcomes the green hands and other sailors who came and went from the place. And it's also no accident that the Unitarian Church is, you know, painted huge up there on the top of the hill. So you can see that, the one with the four, with the you know, what are those called? Those four columns. Yeah, okay. Here in the Bethel also was a Seaman's Register book where the men could write in their names, the names of their vessels, the name of the master, and the next of kin. And this is an extremely valuable source. This one is the giant folio one that goes from 1832 to about 1839 or 40. And then after that, the chaplain of the Bethel went across the street to the custom house and wrote down everybody's name. So the sailors themselves didn't no longer wrote their names down. The chaplain did that. So the Seaman's Register for the New Bedford Port Society runs from 1832 right up to the 1920s. And so it's a fairly complete list of individuals who sailed out of New Bedford. It's not a list of those who came in, which would be a fabulous list to see who was coming in on shipboard. We know who went out. It's not the same list. Oh, so there's the New Bedford Institution for Sailings, you know, right across the street. This building was built in 1853 at the sort of economic height of the city, but it grew out of the earlier organization. Warren, Rhode Island had a Seamen's Friends Society, and there it is. You know, there's volume number 109. So that volume number 109 would have gone right into this wooden box. It would have been one of the books that was included on shipboard, these Seamen's Hymns. And Honolulu, there's the Bethel flying the Bethel flag, and you know, prominently emblazoned on this newspaper, the Friend of Temperance and Seamen. And this, you know, Samuel Damon he was a very famous Seaman's chaplain in Honolulu, and he published the Friend in the basement of the Seaman's Bethel in Honolulu, starting about 1839, I think. And here's a fabulous piece of scrimshaw of Seaman's Bethel. It's flying the Bethel flag. I don't know where it is. I've spent many hours trying to figure out where this actually was. They don't all go by the same name. You know, there was some kind of a Seaman's Bethel in New London, and I held out hope from the granite construction of this building that it was actually in New London, but it was up on Huntington and Jay Streets, and and that's nowhere near the waterfront the way this portrays. So I don't know where this is. There were Seamen's Bethel. Here's a Seamen's Bethel that later became Sacred Heart Church on North Square in Boston. And when the Italians took it over, they completely changed the exterior and made it very Italian looking. It's like this for most Mediterranean, beautiful sort of arches, and it doesn't look anything like that. But that looks very similar to that, and our own Seamen's Bethel. So there was a look to these places. And then there were the floating churches. And yes, ma'am.
I may have missed it, but are you saying that these boxes with the books for the ships, was it for the officers or was it for the...
Oh, no. It was for the men. It was a library, shipboard library.
Comment on the literacy level? I'm surprised.
Literacy level was high.
Really?
Very high. As a matter of fact, when you really look through the logbook and journal collection, various logbook and journal collections, you can see very often the spelling is a little off, but for the most part, they are beautifully written and nicely kept. Everybody's penmanship is pretty bad, at some point or other, and over the course of a sea voyage, it fluctuates from bad to terrible to pretty good. But literacy was pretty high on shipboard.
Because those logs were kept by the officers, not by...
Logbooks were kept by the first mate and often by the captain, but anybody could keep a journal. And fully half of the collection across the street are whalemen's journals. If you want to know about this, my book on the subject is coming out. It's launched July 21st of this summer. And there will be, I'll be giving a number of talks on this exact subject coming up over the next year or so. So the title of the book is O'er the Wide and Trackless Sea, Original Art of the Yankee Whale Hunt. I don't know how much it's going to cost. I suspect it's going to be fairly expensive, but I don't know. It's a great big full-color book. So, but there's a couple of chapters in there that deal with just your question. So these floating churches.
Sorry, can I just interrupt?
Yeah, sure.
For a moment. There's a black Mercedes blocking the museum's driveway on Union Street. I just want to make sure it's no one in this room that's about to be towed. Sorry.
That's okay. So here's one in Philadelphia. This one was built about 1855, and it's flying the Bethel flag, right from the top of the floating chapel. And this was one that was on the East River in New York. It was built in 1834. The Seamen's Church Institute of New York, which actually still exists. There's a Seamen's Church Institute in Newport that still exists, and the Seamen's Friends Society in Portland, Maine is active. They're still in business. And so this moves us toward the end of the talk this afternoon. The illustration on the left from William Morris Davis's Nimrod of the Sea, shows a cartload of sailors, and they're on their way to the mariner's home. And I can't say enough about the significance and importance of the ladies' branch of the port societies, because there wouldn't be the story wouldn't be as rich as it is, and the thousands of sailors would not have benefited from the quality living conditions in seaports were it not for them. So thank you all very much. I'll entertain any questions if anyone has any. Yes, ma'am.
Were they all Friends Society that supported the Seamen's Bethels in all of these different locations?
Absolutely not.
All Friends Society?
No.
No.
No. So this was a largely Protestant evangelical movement. But the interesting thing is that these are non-denominational, and so the proprietors, as it were, the founders of these various port societies, recognized that sailors come in all shapes and colors from all around the world, and the idea is to gather everybody into the Christian fold. So it was Christian, fundamentally Christian, but generally non-denominational, and absolutely not Quaker.
Mike, I know that classes were held downstairs in the Bethel for classes in reading and writing. And I wonder if we know who was teaching. Were they women in the Port Society?
Huh, interesting, Peggy. I don't know. I hadn't run into classes being taught down here. So that, what kind of classes?
The idea was that if seamen were illiterate and they would have a chance to come to classes, that would sort of give them the basics.
Fantastic. Yeah. No, I don't know who the teachers were. That's right.
Mike, just to elaborate on that, answer that question, yes, there were a number of classes held down there. The basement, which is the salt box now, was divided up into 3 basic sections. One was the chaplain's office, one was a library, and the rest of it was a schoolhouse. The reason it was changed from a schoolhouse to a salt box is because most of the whalers were illiterate. And they looked at the salt box as, on any ship, the salt box was the first deck below the main deck, where all the provisions were stored, and the crew was allowed to go in there after the provisions dwindled down and use it as a recreation area. So coming out from the boats, they would see this sign that said salt box, thinking they could come in and do a little recreational activity. In actuality, when the ladies' branch got in there, they started teaching a little reading and writing.
So it was the ladies' branch who did the teaching?
It was the ladies' branch, yes, that was doing the teaching. And then they would get ushered upstairs here for a little religious education.
Sir, that list of founders of the Port Society, do we assume those are donors? I mean, put your name on that list. Are they donors? Do we have any information on the amount of money raised to start this, or who are the major?
Oh yeah, it's well documented throughout the reports of the Port Society, how much money they're raising. The ladies' branch breaks it down very carefully as well too. James Arnold, Samuel Rodman Jr. These were presidents and major donors to the society.